cloud. There we go. It looks better that way. Okay, so in this session, we're going to be talking about replace strings and intelligent agents. And we will enable the captions and we will hide them because they cover the bottom on our screen, because they cover the bottom of our screen, making it impossible to access a lot of things. There we go. Okay. And we should do that in general.
Thank you, Casey.
So yeah, if you want to download the Pulse app, by the way, Casey put the URL that you need to include to be able to access it. It's a much better app than the Blackboard one ever was. And it's something that's going to be much more usable for students, because while many students tried to use that app, it did not work reliably with tests and assignments very often. So it's really helpful. So yeah, download the, I think it's called the D2L or the Brightspace Pulse app. If you search in the App Store, either Google Play or the iOS one. Okay.
I haven't logged into your Brightspace course. Casey put the link in right there, oswego.edu/mylearning. So you can go ahead, use your single sign-on to get into your courses. So the workshops are intended to be hands-on. So if there are, announcements, at least for this particular session, if there are announcements that you want to start, working on, we invite you to do that.
Yeah, in fact, we strongly encourage you to actually do this as we go through, because if you try it and see how it works, it's going to be much more likely you'll do it. And it's really not much more work. We'll start with first replace strings, and then we'll move on to intelligent agents, because we'll be using a replace strings in that. So we'll share our screen. And
I'll preface that we are in the process of learning all of the ins and outs of these things ourselves. So we will do our best to answer all of your questions and to find the answers if we are unsure about it. But, the replace strings that we're going to dive into first are, pretty straightforward. There's, really just honestly, there's probably just one that, you're going to use most of the time. And that's to personalize your announcements to have the students' first names in the address.
And you notice here, it's coming up with my name. This is my course, which we're now beginning the third week of that course. And the announcement comes up with my name in it. It just creates a little more sense of presence. It personalizes things a little bit, and it's incredibly easy to do. We'll just show how you do it, basically. So you just write in your editor this. Hi, and then in curly braces, put first name. Capitalization doesn't matter, but it's it's common to put a capital F and a capital N, but you could use lowercase. No spaces though. It does have to be that string. Okay, so all you need to do to address a student by the first name is embed that in nearly every place. You could do that in emails. You can do that in announcements. You could do that on any of the intelligent agents where you're getting a message to students, or customizing any of the content. So you can customize instructions for an exam and so forth, or feedback to students. So if you're giving them feedback on their work, you can embed their name in it. If you want to, you could also include last name, which is the same structure.
Yeah, first name's probably the most typical, just because that kind of creates a little more of an informal connection, to address students by their first name. But you can do this in your modules. You can do this anywhere the text editor exists, which is basically everywhere. You can use these replace strings to personalize the student's experience.
But we should know it will not work in the headlines or the top of the list. It has to be embedded in the item. There are a few places where it doesn't work, but if you test it yourself before you release it, then it will become, then you'll see the issue. Okay, Casey just mentioned it's Brightspace Pulse. Okay, so what should happen, that's a good point. Can it be edited or personalized? It's going to be pulling this out from the name that is listed that Banner is sharing. And what would happen, it was use whatever name that is in the student database. And that could not be personalized generically other than that. Now, I don't know, SUNY or Oswego does have a process to change the name that is used in course lists. And if a student has used that, the name that they have chosen as their primary name or the chosen name should be what is passed along to the course. So if students, for example, has changed gender and so forth, or their gender expression, they can change that name. And there is a form that goes to HR, I think it is.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
And so
online.
it's, something you could direct students to, and I have, plenty of students who go by middle names or nicknames of different sorts. So, it's there are options for them to indicate the name that they use. But it's
But it's not
a bigger
something we can
process.
customize.
Yeah, it's not something we're able to do.
So that has to be done globally for that to work.
Yeah.
So that's really the most common replace string. So just remember that curly braces, first name.
Yeah.
And if you want, you could put first name, a space, and then last name if you wanted to be a little more formal. But in general, being a bit more informal is probably okay. So now that brings us to what we wanted to focus on a bit more, which is intelligent. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for.
Actually, Casey put in a list of possible
Yeah,
strings.
and I do, we want to know.
We can show those, but
There are ideal, so if you click on that chevron at the bottom.
okay, there is a list of these.
There is a list, but they don't necessarily correspond to
anything
names
you'd
we
want to
would be
share with
using.
students.
So, the org unit name, for instance, would be your course name, but the way that our courses are created in Brightspace.
With the long string to
have-
identify the institution, the course.
The
so
course,
this-
the semester. And so, it's like, hey, it'd be nice to be like, hey, Katie, let's say that's the student's name, Katie. We haven't seen you in this course, right? But instead of saying we haven't seen you in women in crime, it would say we haven't seen you in 22 SU CRJ 367 women in crime. So it's not as it's clear that it's a
pretty much the only ones you want to use
yeah,
are
it's probably
first
the
name,
first name.
And maybe last name. The email is automatically taken care of within the agents, and you don't really need to use it. That's more for higher level things. If in terms of the structure, if you're doing a mass mailing to everyone at
Right.
Oswego, then you'd use perhaps some of these tools in building that, or SUNY could use at your direct messages to
Mhm.
particular campuses, but it's not. It's a little unfortunate, but it would be nice if there were more options, but
Yeah,
I don't think any of them are going to be very useful.
yeah.
So,
Any quick questions on that? Because what we do want to show you are using those intelligent agents and how, we can also show you how to use those replace strings in that as well.
and I'd like you to actually try just going through one that I created yesterday. Okay, and it's just a login reminder. We do have a message here.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
We
I had hoped it was more too.
Yeah, we hoped it was going to be better too. Because I was talking with John. I was like, it would have been great if I could say, hey, John, you only received a 70 on this exam, and I was really hoping you would, or that we would get better on this, right? And something to that effect, right? So it'd be nice if you could put in like an exam grade that would automatically filter in based on the student's exam, but that's not available as these replace strings,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
So pretty much first name is, or first and
First
last name.
names,
are the
yeah, first
only
and last
likely.
names are the ones, and at least if you're using them, then you can kind of memorize those strings and drop them in everywhere you'd like.
Oops.
Pretty easily, at least.
So let's try working through one. And the way you get to it is you go to Course Tools, Admin, and Intelligent Agents, which are down in Communications. And so what you would do to create one, and I'd suggest you follow along with this one because it's probably a useful one. We'll just go through it step by step. You would click new agent, but I've already got one here, so we can try that. And you notice you have the option of running it now if you'd like. We're not going to do that because this is actually a live course and it's going to be triggered on Friday at 8 a.m. So we're going to edit it though and show what it looks like. So give it a name, something that will be intuitive for you, like login reminder, and a description so that you remember what it is when you come into another course. And you can share these across your courses, which will be handy. And once you have it done, you want to make sure it's enabled. You may not do that immediately, but to use it, it has to be enabled. You create a category, and I called this one participation because it was focused on making sure people are connecting with the course. But you would first click add category, and then you would type in a name, and then you could group them together because, for example, you might have quiz reminders, or you might have assignment reminders, or you might have reminders for discussion participation. This is just going to be a really simple one, but then we'll explore some of the others. So create a name that makes sense. Participation seemed to make sense for me. And then you pick scheduling, and you have a list of options here. You could have no schedule, so you could do it whenever you feel like, but that takes away some of the advantage of the automation. You could have a one-time run, so it's just a one-time thing that happens. It could be done hourly if you really want to harass students. I wouldn't recommend that.
Yeah, I'm not sure when you would want to do an hourly one.
Maybe if you have a deadline approaching in 2 hours, you might do it a couple of times, but even that's kind of harassing.
Yeah.
More typically, some people will use daily for some things, but I chose weekly here because I have 1 week modules, but it could also be triggered by other things. So so mine is going to repeat once a week on a Friday, but if you wanted to happen, say twice a week, you could put, you could pick Tuesday and Friday or Monday and Thursday, whatever.
Yeah.
Or every other day if you want. I have a starting and end date for it. You don't need to do that. One nice thing about intelligent agents that was not true back when we had the same sort of feature in Angel was that when you loaded a new course in Angel, it would reactivate any agents that you have. So messages would go out to your previous semester's class. Well, it was a bit of a mess that way. But Brightspace will only do it when we'll send the messages out while the course is actually active. So any agents you create now will not trigger until your course is open. And similarly, once your course ends and access ends, your students will no longer be getting this. So you don't have to worry about this starting and ending date if you don't want to. But I put it in just because I was testing things. Now, you could send messages out to either specific groups of students or specific, if you have TAs in the class, you could send it out to your TAs. But in general, you want it to work with everyone visible in the class list. And you have 2 options in terms of activity. One is it could be due to login activity where they log into the course, or it could be actually course activity. And I don't want students just to log into the class and then log out without doing something, or at least looking at something. So I chose a course activity option, which is probably a more useful measure of at least minimal engagement. And I just chose user has not accessed a course in the last 7 days. And then you could create release conditions. And that's if you want to be triggered by something else. So for example, you might set up a discussion reminder that is triggered by the completion of a module quiz in the last thing. Or you might want students to start working with watching some videos or engaging in some other activity after they've completed a reading quiz or something similar. So you could set a release condition where it will only start under a certain condition. In this case, I didn't want to do that, but we can look at some of those release conditions. And the release conditions involves submitting assignments, the scores on the assignment, or no submission on an assignment. It could be if they achieve some award, which are basically like micro-credentials or badges, which are available as a tool that we haven't done any work with. It could be whether they've completed a checklist or a checklist item, or if they have not completed a checklist or a checklist item that they should have. It could be based on whether or not they've enrolled in a group. And you can set up triggers that will automatically enroll them in groups or
So if
remove
you're,
them from
yeah,
groups.
if you're doing group work and you're requiring students to, enroll into a group, that could be an option there. There's really, there's so many options here. If we haven't really done any work with competencies, so we won't touch on that yet, but and they're not quite set up
If
yet.
you're doing mastery, well, you can do it in your own
Okay.
course, but
Yeah.
basically competencies are the learning objectives that you want students to achieve. And you could build a mastery learning pathway, or you could use some
Yeah.
UDL principles and give students multiple ways of demonstrating competency. And you can assign badges to them if they achieve competency and so forth. We've got a lot of flexibility that we never had before.
Visiting content, completing some kind of content related to that, discussion posts, getting a particular grade on an item, scores on quizzes, completing a survey generally. So there's, really for any kind of activity that you have in the course, whether you are just, looking for them to access particular content. So maybe it's a reading that you want to make sure that they've read, or to give them a reminder that they should have read at some point. That's there's really any release condition that you can think of is probably on here.
And the grade value is really useful, because if they're doing really well on quizzes or assignments, you can send a message out congratulating them on their good work. If they're not doing so well, you can send a reminder of what resources are available to help them improve their performance. And if you allow them to retake the quiz, you can remind them that they do have additional attempts, but before they do, they may want to review the supporting materials that might allow them to be more successful. Or you might ask them to contact you to talk about some strategies to increase their success.
It'd be a really good way to kind of work in some of that growth mindset language, particularly if students are falling behind or struggling with any of your assessments. So there's a lot of, I think, opportunities here to incorporate some evidence-based practices. So a couple of things in the chat. Would you have to create a new one for each condition type?
Yes.
Yeah, it's only going to allow you to pick, I believe it just allows you to pick one condition. Is that correct? And so, yeah, you would have to do that.
I believe you can only create one. One of the things we did have in Angel is you could combine them and use logical conditions to trigger things. So it's not quite as flexible as what we had, say, 7 or 8 years ago, but it's a whole lot better than what we had in Blackboard. And you can use these to, again, conditionally open materials. If you have some supporting materials for students who may be struggling, you can share some additional tools or additional quizzes or other things. You can create custom learning paths using the conditional release options and intelligent agents.
Oh, that's a good point, Holly. Thank you for mentioning that. Holly wrote in the chat that it will not work if you have not created your quizzes, assignments, and content yet. So you have to make sure you do intelligent agents following creating your course content.
And that's why the example we chose here is just the login condition.
Right, the course activity condition. So,
and then you have some other options that you need to set. One is take action only the first time the criteria is satisfied. And so if this is attached to, well, if this is a login reminder, I want it to repeat weekly, because I want to do this all through the semester. But if you only want to send a one-time notification for students, you could choose the first time, but then you wouldn't need that repeat option.
Yeah.
But and then the only option really to get information out to students is to send an email. We used to have more, we could customize the content and pages, but again, this is a lot more than we had before. And what you need to do, and this is something that took us a few minutes to figure out, is there is another replace string that's really, really important here. And that's that initiating user. That's not on the list of strings that you have, replace strings, but it is the one that you need to use to send notes out to students when they've met these criteria. So remember this string. You can find it in lots of institutions' documentation.
Mhm.
You won't find it in a lot of the Brightspace documentation. But so this is really important. This is the initiating user is the student who meets the condition. So you would use this as a starting point. And then you would use,
Yeah,
you may
to-
want to send it to yourself so
Yeah.
you know what messages are going out, and give it a subject line, give it the name. And again, this is another replace string, because since this is going to use all individuals, you need to use the initiating user first name and not the first name string. So you need two more replace strings than the first name. And basically you need that initiating user as a key here. And so this was just one I just set up last night, and it's right there. And you can also, if you want, you could do a video recording and embed it. You could record some audio. You could choose an existing thing, or you could choose, if you want to provide students with a list of support materials, you could create a Word file, a PDF with some resources, instructions for them on how, on things that may help them be more successful. You could upload that, attach it, and then you could send it as HTML mail or plain text and lose any of the formatting and so forth. But either would work. HTML just generally looks a little bit better. And then when you're done, save and close. There it is. I only have one set up so far because it's been a rough few weeks here, but I will be setting up more. I'll be setting up reminders for each discussion and so forth. And any questions? Is it working? Have you tried it? We can try creating another one.
John, can you go back to the replacement string for the message itself? Hi, initiating user, comma, first name. What was that?
That
I'm
should
sorry.
work. Yes.
Just that. I apologize.
Yes, the
Yeah.
initiating user first name will replace the name with the first name of the student who's getting the email.
So it's bracket initiating user, bracket,
Initiating user. Mhm.
comma, bracket first name, comma, in the actual message section.
Maggie is typing it in the chat.
Once I learn.
Okay. Thanks, Maggie.
This is all you need, right? is
Okay, I've got too many brackets.
Yeah, and you can just do,
Yeah.
you know, you can,
Okay,
you know, add that text. You know, yeah, you can add text around either side of that too.
So anywhere you want their first name to appear, you would use the initiating user first name in the agent. And that was something we struggled with a little bit because
Yeah,
that
'cause
wasn't clear in any of the instructions.
Yeah, we were
And-
trying to, get this to get our agents to run and error kept coming up and we were baffled for a little bit, but
But I found
with
it.
some research, yeah,
So-
found it. So yeah, so basically two replace strings that are gonna be important. First name and initiating user first name. And initiating user for their email.
John,
would
I
it be
would take you
helpful
up on
to-
your offer to create another one, if you wouldn't mind from the start.
Yeah, if you want to share your screen,
Sure.
or do you, or was
No,
that?
no,
a-
I was asking, John
us?
said, would you like me to do another one? And
We can
Let's-
create one and we'll see if it works.
Let's create your discussion reminders since you said you were gonna do that.
Mhm. So what I wanted, so I'm going to create a new one, a new agent. And this one I'm going to call, let's call this metacognitive discussion reminder.
part of my problem, John, is that when it came up on mine, when I was doing it, it looked different and I didn't have the same stuff. So I don't remember seeing agent name. But
It's right at the top. And this is just for your use, so it will show up in lists of agents with this name.
Okay. hold on.
So, yeah, when you go into course tool, course admin, under the communication area, there should be a link for intelligent agents. And then once you click in
Oh,
menu, that menu will bring you to what we just saw before this page, which will allow you to add a new.
what was it
agent.
called? Intelligent? Oh, intelligent agents. That's
Yeah.
why. I was in announcements. Sorry, that's why.
Course tools and then communication, and then course admin and then communication.
Okay. That's very helpful because I was in the wrong place. That's why I wanted you to do it again, because I was like, I don't know.
It starts to become intuitive, but it's a bit of an adjustment. So
Yeah.
I'll call this a discussion reminder discussion reminders will be the category because I'll create multiple ones here.
Yeah, for other
Um,
types of discussions.
And there we go. I want to enable it. I'm going to be brave here and we're going to do it on a weekly schedule. And my discussions, I asked them to do the first post on Friday. So I will send a reminder to them Friday morning saying, let's say at 9 a.m. And the start date, we can make it the current day. The end date, I'll put somewhere in August. Say 2022. I think that's about when it ends. If not, it's pretty close. I want it to apply to all users in the class list. And I don't want to do it based on login activity. I want to do it based on the release condition. And I'm going to create a release condition based on here, discussion posts. So I'm going to go down to discussion posted in the topic. So I want to do it for no posts in the topic. And I want to select a discussion. And this week it's going to, so I don't want to do this weekly. This is going to be a one-time thing. I've got to go back and change that. So this week, the Metacognitive Cafe is dealing with distractions. And the type would be no threads created by the user. Okay, so I'm going to create that.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see. Well, I haven't actually created what will happen. So this is going to be actually then a one-time run because this is not something I want to remind them each week to post in that particular discussion forum. I was hoping that there might be an option for the
Right.
forum and not the topic, but this is something I'd have to copy for each of them.
Was there not an option to do that in like, because it had.
Well, let's take a
Yeah,
look.
we'll
I
take a
may have
look
missed
again.
something there. Let's take another look.
But I do want to say that, if, for instance, in some of my assessments, I allow students kind of a hard deadline closer to the end of the semester. So that might be an instance where you do want weekly reminders if you want them to be like, hey, you never did this activity. You have, there was a preferred deadline, but there is, a hard deadline at the end of the semester.
Yeah, so it is in the topic. It is not on the forum.
So if you.
The topic,
We'll pick that one first.
which,
The no posts authored, right? Because that's the condition.
well,
type.
except.
Oh,
but
I
it
see
is-
what you're saying.
It
Yeah,
is a
it's
topic, not a forum.
Yeah.
So it's only a
too bad.
one-time release. So,
Okay,
so I,
gotcha.
yeah, now did that override it, discussion? So it is not a weekly reminder. It is a reminder. So this would be Metacognitive Cafe discussion 3 reminder. There we go. So this will be something that is a bit more work to do because it is tied to a specific content item. It's a one-time run, and that will be actually, I'm going to run it just on Friday, and that's going to be at 8 a.m. All right, what did I say, 9 a.m.?
9 a.m.
Yeah, we don't want the reminders waking students up. 9 a.m. on the 10th.
It might still wake.
It
them
might
up.
still
I was
wake
gonna say, you better make it 11.
Well, it'll be there when they wake up. Okay, so I already have that one condition, and it does look like you can add multiple conditions. I'm not sure if they're,
If there's
well,
like a
and you
lot.
have if there's more than one, you might have the option of doing one or more.
Click on that.
Well, any
condition
condition.
or all conditions. So,
Yeah,
yeah, so you could
So you could-
require multiple conditions to be met. So if they didn't do this and they didn't do, a previous one, you might say, please
I was wondering if there was a
Yeah.
way of setting this up, listing all of that,
It'd be
but the
nice.
problem is you could set this up where there's a weekly reminder and I could list each of the discussion options. And if they
Any
have
of them
not
are
done
max.
any polls, well, it would have, but it wouldn't be time bound. So
Right.
if, as long, so that won't work. Okay.
Yeah,
In this case, it has to be done for this. So I want to do this only the first time. It's only going to run once, so it doesn't matter. I want to send an email when the criteria is satisfied. So this would go to initiating user. And then I'm going to do a blind carbon copy to myself. The subject will be metacognitive, a discussion reminder. This is just a reminder. First post in this discussion forum is due tonight by 11:59 p.m. And again, this came up in an earlier session, and we can, let me make it a little more personalized. Hi, and then initiating user first name. Someone in a session yesterday, I think it was, mentioned that they use 5 o'clock as the time for their due dates. And there's a lot of good reasons for that, because we don't want to encourage students to be staying up late at night. And maybe Friday night at midnight is not the best time to have something
Right.
due for a college age student. But I've been using that as a deadline just because students are used, well, students tend to work late and they don't have to wait until Friday night. They could do it Friday morning if they want, and maybe this email will prompt them. And then this should now exist. And so I've just set up a reminder for that. And now I'll have to do that for the other 23, because there's 2 in each module. Okay, so that's how you do it. And you can use multiple criteria, and you do have the option of setting up and or criteria, you know, and if you do that cleverly, it might reduce the need to repeat it. Ooh, 6 a.m. would just be cruel. It's hard to stay up that late. Yeah, students may hate the 5 p.m. one, but at least you're not encouraging them to have poor sleep habits. So you can focus on their wellness and so forth. Some people suggest 9 o'clock because
yeah.
midnight is, you
9
know,
p.m.
encouraging students to get more sleep is probably not a bad thing. It's not going to have much of an impact, but it, you know, it's worth considering at least. Okay, so any questions or thoughts or reactions? It really will be intuitive as you get used to this.
As someone who is not, you know, a coder or, you know, has a background in
Oh.
computer science, I do find it becomes intuitive after a while.
Ben has a question, not able to view in student modes the modules that you created. The reason for that is that they're probably hidden. And so if we go, this course is an active one. So what happens is if we look at this in the content view, this is what I see. This is, oh, I gotta get rid of that. I thought I did. Because that's all in a different folder. Well, I'll get rid of that later. I thought I had. They discourage the use of that because it's not supported in actually the current version of Brightspace. For whatever reason, SUNY chose not to use the current version of Brightspace. They chose to use the old one, which is gradually being updated. And there is no overview option in the app or in the actual current version of Brightspace. They want to make sure we stay on the trailing edge of technology. That was done by SUNY as a whole. It wasn't a local choice. So if
Hey,
we
John,
go-
I want to make sure I didn't miss what you just said there. You're saying that we should we delete this overview? Is that what you were just saying?
That's what's recommended. It will work this year, but it won't work once we finally upgrade to the current release of Brightspace. I have no idea why SUNY made that choice. I only discovered that last week while I was at the CIT conference. And I was talking to the Brightspace people who were somewhat surprised that SUNY made that choice. Because, you know, it's going to be very, very similar. But the point, what I was going to say is, if we look at this from the course home, what I see is a whole list of modules. And I put the most recent, the currently active one at the top, and then it goes down. But you notice the rest of these are all here. When I go to Student View, what will happen is it's not going to actually show anything except for the modules that are already visible. So when I click on my name here, I view it as a student. What will happen is they'll only see the course information, which is where I moved all the course overview stuff into. And because you notice in the table of contents, there is no course overview option. And this is a view that students get in the app, and that will happen moving forward. And I thought I had deleted it, I meant to. But you notice nothing beyond that appears. And what you have to do is you have to make the individual blocks. I'm going to exit once I get access to that exit. There's a lot of things covering the screen here. What happens is, if you look at these if I look at the later modules, when I open them, no. Well, I with a slash through it, that means it's hidden. So if you want to see those modules, by default, any modules you create are hidden unless you click on that and you make it open.
You can also, let's say, you know, you have a ton of modules, right? If you go into your table of contents, you can select the bulk edit option, and that will allow you to change the visibility, as well as, you know, allow you to change, I guess, the visibility.
Yeah, so
of the
it just shows
items
it
in
there, and you can just click on the eye to make it visible and so forth. But it's a long list this way because it includes everything within it. I'd suggest doing it with the previous view.
Yeah.
So in other words, Ben, the reason why you can't see it is because those blocks are still hidden. So if you unhide them, you should be able to see it. Now, and what I did say is it shouldn't, anything you put in that overview module, I believe, does not show up in the Pulse app, nor will it show up in future versions of Brightspace. That feature is going away because they're moving to this block, more linear structure. So it's recommended, and that's something that they talk about in the SUNY training, that you not use it and you just delete that module. But you can move all that right into the list of activities and put it right up at the top. You can pin it to the top. Dennis.
Yeah, I also learned from the Heron group is it'll duplicate your table of contents if you put anything in there. So I don't know. That's what she said. But the other thing is I'm not sure about what is. Let me just rephrase that. Is there an easy way to see if something that's brought in is tied to the grade book? Because I'm a academic hoarder, and I'm hoping that I probably could keep stuff but not make it visible. But I don't want it to interfere with the grading stuff. I think in most of my classes, they're not gradable yet anyway, but is there a way to check to see what's connected to we don't call it a grade book, but.
Yeah, well, actually, one way of doing that, and I think I can do this without making any of my students' grades visible, is if you go in, we'll find out very shortly, and if so, I'll delete that from the video. But if you go into Course Admin, and you go into grades, which is under assessment, you should see as one of your options will be the manage grades option. And the manage grade, oops, I will cut that out of the video. But so it's not that, it's the, the manage grades is there, but I accidentally did not change it fast enough. So what happens is if you go to the manage grades option, you'll see all the items that will appear in the grade book. So I have SmartBook assignments, those are McGraw-Hill ones. I have other assignments that I've created. I have a midterm exam. I have weekly quizzes or every other week quizzes, a final exam that's in 2 parts. I have all the discussions and all this. But basically, when I go through this, I can see what's there. And if it's not there, I can go back to the content item, edit it, and one of the tabs will be assessment. And if you click that, you can then connect that to the grade book. It will ask you for the category and then information about the number of points and how you want it to be included in the grade book.
Can you disconnect it though?
But you can if you remove the assessment or you put no grade. Let's take an
Okay,
item.
okay, don't worry about it.
Well, we can take an item that is not currently in, if I go to content, something that's not currently active, we can do that. So if there's something you don't want to be graded, let's go to, let me go through one of the modules that we're not yet at. And when we go to that, we can see, for example, there's this content discussion. If I choose, I should be able to choose, if I can get to the transcript thing is covering it again, sorry. I should be able to choose, no, I have to actually go back one more step. This is something I know and I'm just tired. You have to go back to course admin, and because it's a discussion, you would find it under the discussions, and that's where you would edit. So all the editing of assignments, discussions, and so forth, you should do within the tool for those, because you don't have the same editing ability. So let's say I want to edit this discussion forum. I would choose edit topic. And here, once you're editing the topic, there's the assessment tab. And that's where it's tied to the grade book. And what you can always do there is you should be able to choose what?
I think, can you
Assess the
check?
topic?
Oh,
No,
no,
that's
that's
actually
just
grading.
actually
Yeah, I
grading it,
didn't think so.
sorry.
Okay, so let's go back there. And you should be able to see how to remove it once you connected it. You can change it. You can change its category. You could always make it score out of 0 and then it won't enter. And you do have the option of hiding it, but I'm not sure. You could make it invisible in the grade book and you could set the points to 0, but I'm not sure how you could remove it once you've made it a gradable item. Well,
Okay.
let's see. Yeah, it doesn't look like you can easily remove it without recreating it. There may be a way, but I haven't tried that yet. I've only been connecting things.
Yeah.
But when you're in the grade book, you can choose. I can't go into mine because it's active and there are student grades there, but you can choose to make things invisible, or in this page, you could make the point 0, in which case it won't affect the computation of the grade. So you could do that and then make it invisible to students in the grade book, and then they'd never see it.
It may be in bulk edit too, because I know there's a lot of good stuff, and you can do a lot of things in bulk edit, and that's really a good feature because
It is, yeah.
they're always catching me on getting the wrong dates for 2019.
Able to edit like the.
So let's go back to the discussions and see if that's available to do as an option.
Go right ahead.
It would be right up here if it's available, and I'm not seeing it under discussions. It may be in some other category. It is with assignments, it is with quizzes.
and-
But I don't see that option here, at least. By the way, these are the common instruction. This is just something we talked
Yeah.
about in earlier work. Many of you are here, but you can put general instructions here, and then that's inherited in the forum instructions, and that's inherited by all the topics below that. So that initial paragraph shows up in each of those, so you don't have to reproduce it. Oops. There we go. Let me get out of there with the student names. So, okay. So, yeah, I'm not entirely sure, going back to Holly's question about the Pulse app or the comment, I'm not sure that it will not show up in the Pulse app. I can actually check that, I suppose. But it is something that Brightspace is encouraging them not to use.
The overview.
The overview document, yeah. And in fact, it is not showing up in the Pulse app. So So in general, delete that overview thing, and anything that you want to put in the course overview, just create a new module and drag it all to that, or create a new version of the course overview. I ended up recreating it, making it a little more, well, we can actually show what mine is, because that does illustrate a couple of other nice tools that we have talked about before. So if we go to content, what I did there is in that, if we go to the course home, in that overview document, it's basically the information in the syllabus, including the syllabus, in a somewhat cleaner organization, so that if students load the first part here, this tells them how to communicate, and then they just basically scroll through. I haven't changed these images yet, but there's a syllabus that they can then download. It's accessible and so forth. And then here's a rubric. I got to update that one. I just took an old one and posted it. But it gives them information here. And in particular, when they get to things, this was something they put in because it's inclusive access. They're not moving forward. I don't know. I messed up there somewhere there. I got to work on this. But in any case, it went to another. Forget that. I got to see what went wrong there. It should just go through page by page. And one of the things I did use there was I put in several documents together in an accordion document. And it looks like some other document ended up getting in there, probably when I was messing around. Maybe when we did an earlier workshop, I may have dragged and dropped something by mistake. Okay, in any case, Module 3. Oh, well. The intelligent agents are a really nice feature, and I'm glad we got them back. And I think we'll learn more about them, as we start using it a bit more.
Yeah.
Any questions? Well, we can stop here, and then we'll be back to talk about group work in just about 11, 12 minutes. Thank you.
Guys, thank you.
Bear with us. We're still learning this stuff.